Good morning. Welcome to Dan Stolts talking about cloud security. Please set your communication devices on vibrate or just turn them off and sit back and enjoy. If you need to have a conversation, please step outside. And it's now my great pleasure to introduce Dan from Microsoft.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Stolts. I work for Microsoft. I've been with Microsoft for about 5 years. You can reach me on my blog, itproguru.com. You can also reach me via email, itproguru@microsoft.com, or my preferred method of communication, Twitter @itproguru. My job basically is a public speaker. I've been in the technology industry for almost 30 years. In addition to my duties at Microsoft, I also own and operate a hosting and consulting business out of the South Shore, based at Integrated Technology. I'm also very involved with the community. So I am the president of Boston User Groups, which is basically they manage a website of all the user group and community activities that go on in the Boston area. Actually, it's all of New England and even outside of New England in a lot of cases. So I would encourage you to check it out, bostonusergroups.com, bostonusergroups.org. Actually, I think .org or .com will both get you there. I'm also involved in the local community in my neighborhood. I'm a scout leader. I've been doing that with my son for the last couple of years and absolutely enjoy it immensely. In addition, I also help with a lot of other local user groups like Virtualization Group Boston. I'm the chairman there. They're online at virtg.com, as well as lots of other things. And you know, I support the community, the security community whenever I can, and I really appreciate you guys having me here to speak at this event. So today we're going to talk about how secure is the cloud. And really, since I'm a Microsoft employee, I'm really going to focus that discussion around Windows Azure, which is the Microsoft Cloud solution. But a lot of the things that we're going to talk about are the same questions that you're going to want to ask no matter what cloud provider that you're looking at. I want to start the discussion with letting you know that you can get, if you want to try some of this stuff out, if you want to actually get familiar with the cloud, you can go to a link I have up here, ak.ms/IaaS. IaaS stands for Information Service. Infrastructure as a service, sorry, brain dead. This is caused from too much work. So anybody feel like they work too much in their job? Just me? Oh, a few people, okay. Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of that. So in addition, if you want to try some stuff out, you want to actually get step-by-step on how to do different things, on my blog, itproguru.com/HOL for hands-on labs. I do have some step-by-steps to walk you through getting familiar with some of these technologies. And I do a lot of public speaking. So if you want to follow me or look at other topics that I'm speaking on, whether it be Windows Server, Windows Azure, security, whatever, I have a public calendar, neitpro.com. So you might want to check that out and you know, find out what else, what other opportunities there are to get some free education. And oh, by the way, whenever you set up your Azure account, even if you're not interested in, you know, cloud services or, you know, deploying cloud services in your organization, it's a really cool opportunity, since companies like Microsoft do give you free evaluation accounts, to spin up some servers in the cloud to do, you know, cool stuff, fun stuff. You know, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily advocate that you spin up 1,000, you know, servers in the sky to go, you know, hack somebody. But if you wanted to spin up a few servers in the cloud to go try to hack yourself, right, to see how vulnerable you might be, there's some really cool opportunities there for security professionals. So let me ask you a couple of questions while we're on that topic. How many people in the room consider themselves developers or attached to the developer community? Wow, okay, a fair number. And so the same question on the IT pro side or infrastructure side? How many people consider themselves more infrastructure? All right, and who's just straight up security? Wow, okay, excellent. I wanted to kind of just get a gauge of the audience and who I'm talking with today. Now, if you do decide to spin up a Windows Azure service, you want to leverage that, I am offering a challenge this is an event challenge. So before I go into any detail on this, just a show of hands, if I gave you a challenge that takes you 5 minutes to do, It's only available to the people that are here at this event today. And I'm giving you until Tuesday to do it. How many people would be interested in doing that for the opportunity to win either an Xbox console with Kinect or a Microsoft Surface, their choice? Show of hands? Anybody? Okay, so there's a little bit of interest, so I'll spend a couple seconds on it. There's a handout at the table. If you didn't get it, it looks like this, right? It gives you all the instructions, but basically all you got to do is build a Windows Azure system, right? And I'll give you a link to do it for free. That takes you about, that one takes a little more than 5 minutes. That one takes about, if you already have an Azure account, it takes 5 minutes. If you don't have an Azure account, it does take about 15 minutes to set up an Azure account, the free trial. But to do the downloads, you don't need an Azure account, you just need a live ID, which just takes a couple of minutes. And then start the download, do a screenshot of the download, and then pause it. If you're going to do it here at the event, please don't download these bits because there's a lot of stuff there. Those are ISO images. Don't download them at the event because it'll really chew up the media. But you can start it, you know, as soon as it hits the 0% pause, so it's not downloading here on our wireless, and then send me a screenshot of that paused image. Email the screenshot to me, and that'll enter you for the drawing. And I'll do the drawing Tuesday afternoon, and I'll email whoever the winner is and say, hey, you're the winner. Would you like the Surface or the Xbox, and what's your address that I can send it to? So take a look, grab one of these. By the way, I did this. This is the first time that I've done the Xbox and the Surface, you get to pick kind of thing. Sorry, this is the second time. The first time I did it was in front of an audience. It was at the keynote, very similar to what we just had in the last session. I was doing the keynote, and there were 280 people in the audience. I only had 3 people that wanted to take the 5 minutes to do this. So it kind of surprised me. So this is the second time I've done it. I'll see if I have better results this time. But the person that won it actually had a 1 in 3 chance of winning. I don't know if you'll have a 1 in 3 chance of winning here. Maybe it'll be 1 in 3, maybe 1 in 5, maybe 1 in 50. I don't know, but still really good odds if you want to spend the 5 minutes to do the work. If you don't want to spend the 5 minutes to do the work, or you know you're not going to win anyway, hey, you know what? Do it anyway for me because it helps your community. Because these links are tied back to Microsoft monitors these links, and they give out swag to different community organizations based on the number of people that actually do this. So if you don't want to do it for the drawing, go ahead and do it for the community. They would appreciate it. All right. So I also want to let you know, in case you're interested in getting certified on Windows Server, there's a free Early Experts program. So you can get, Microsoft has an online university where they have free training. And Early Experts is an online program that will allow you to walk through and get your certification on Windows Server 2012 for free. So it's earlyexperts.net. I would encourage you to check that out if you're interested in getting more training. All right, so here's our agenda for today. Who can read this? Okay, this was encrypted with my private key, so you'd have to have the public key in order to decrypt it. So it's classified, right? And really that's what we're going to be talking about, is how secure is stuff, and talking about classifying your data and your systems. But really yeah.
Is your presentation going to be available?
I will make my presentation available. So I would presume it would be on the BSides site. I'll email it to them as soon as I'm done with the presentation today. So absolutely, I'll make it available. I'm also going to put it on my blog. So if you go to itproguru.com and then click on resources, it'll be right there under the resources page. And it'll probably be sometime this weekend that I get it up. So it won't be up today because I've got another engagement right after this. But I will get it up there by Monday. So these are really the questions that I'm going to try to answer today during this presentation. And oh, by the way, this is really a 75-minute presentation that I've narrowed down to the 40 minutes that they've given me. So I'm going to kind of screen through it a little fast, but I think with the speed at which I'm able to talk, that I'll be able to get you all of the information. And really a few things that we want to talk about in terms of security. First is confidentiality. That is, whenever I have data, how secure is that data in terms of somebody else not being able to gain access to it? So if I'm putting my data, my servers in the cloud, is Microsoft going to be able to see all of my stuff, right? And who knows the answer to that? Absolutely, right? No, just kidding. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about integrity. What is the possibility that somebody other than me can change my data if it's sitting in the cloud, right? And how do I protect from making or make sure that that my data has absolute integrity? And then of course availability, because whenever you move to the cloud, your stuff is not in your infrastructure anymore. Now you have availability concerns obviously on your on-prem systems as well, because if a server goes down, it's not available, right? But you need some kind of extra assurances that whenever you put something on somebody else's infrastructure, that it is going to be available. Because, I mean, let's face it, what good is having data in the cloud if you can't access it, right? So you have to have availability. And kind of underneath all of that, or wrapped around all of that, we need to consider risk management and compliance. Lots of people have different things that they look at from a risk management standpoint. They have different things that different requirements from a compliance standpoint. So we're going to look at all of those. So moving to the cloud, first and foremost, I want to say there's a lot of customer accountability, right? Let's face it, you put a server in the cloud and you make your username administrator and you make your password, it's not very secure, right? It doesn't matter if you have, private public keys, certificates doing, creating a tunnel between your on-prem and your cloud services if you have RDP open and you have no password, right? So there is some accountability for you, just like there's accountability in your organization to make sure that you're doing the best practices to make sure that your information is secure and safe. And in a multi-tenant environment, multi-tenancy is where you have more than one person, more than one company's data on a single resource, like a server, a computer, a hard disk, whatever. Are those people going to be able to gain access to my data? Am I going to be able to protect my systems from them? And there's a lot of things that go into moving to the cloud. So different responsibilities. Who has responsibility for the different components that make up the infrastructure and the resources that data is stored on? We've got to understand, and some of the things that we're doing within Microsoft are differentiations of roles of responsibility. So, people that have a key to do things are supposed to have the key to do those things and can get into those areas. And if they don't need to be somewhere, they're not going to be able to be somewhere. But fundamentally, really what the bulk of what we need to consider today is trust. So let me ask you a question. Who trusts Microsoft with all of their data and all of their systems? Not a single hand. Okay, me. And do I? Well, let me put it a different way. How many of you have your data on a Windows Server system? Some data on a Windows Server system. Okay? Really? Only that many hands? Who's sleeping? A few, okay. So the moral of that story is there is inherently some trust already, right? Because you trust HP, if you have HP servers, that they're not going and getting after your data through stuff that, that's built into the firmware of their servers, right? You trust Microsoft if you have servers running in your organization. You trust that they're not, scraping your data and sending it somewhere. Now, but whenever we talk about trust, let me. Sorry, I moved ahead too fast. When we talk about trust, let me say this. You guys know from a privacy standpoint what Microsoft's policy. You guys have an idea of what privacy, how Microsoft feels about privacy, right? They feel like your data is your data; it belongs to you. Well, maybe not. Maybe whenever you move to the cloud, their policy is more like Google. You know what Google's policy is, right? Your data is our data, right? So whenever you look at cloud services, it's important that you understand what the different companies have for their policies, right? In Microsoft's case, your data is your data. In other companies' case, it may not be the case. So it's important for us as consumers to recognize whenever we go to cloud services what the different policies are. So it's not good enough to get that screen that says, privacy policy and just click OK after, you've scrolled down at 1,000,000 miles an hour through the 14 pages or didn't bother to scroll down at all. So whenever you move into the cloud, these are some things that you have to do because trust is a big factor. Now, there are multiple sources for trust. And there's lots of things that go into trust. I mean, from a legal standpoint, the laws are created with some inherent trust built in, right? You trust that the government is not looking at your data and doing bad things with it. You trust that within the industry that people are going to play fair, and not everybody's trying to, for the sake of better words, screw everybody else, right? There's some inherent trust that otherwise you're just going to be a paranoid addict, you might as well just put all your stuff in a vault and not connect it to anything, connected with a wire. I mean, really, if you don't trust anybody about anything, that's the only way that you can really secure anything, right? You guys know that. Anybody not know that? Okay, good. So ISO standards. I mean, if you are ISO compliant, then you have a certificate, if you will, that says that I am meeting the requirements for this certificate. Therefore, other people can trust that I am meeting those criteria. Right? That's what that means. So if you are ISO compliant, that means you have these policies and procedures in place, and that others can trust that you're following those policies and procedures. So everybody else trusts you that because you have that certification, you are compliant in those areas. And then, of course, you have your own internal trusts. Maybe you do background checks or something for your employees, or maybe you have your own internal policies and procedures that go above and beyond some of the others even, right? So there's trust inherently built into everything that we do. And what we've got to do is we've got to figure out how much we're going to trust the different layers of the different components that are involved with our infrastructure. So let's go back to Windows Azure and compliance and the core services. So some of the things, Microsoft can't have everybody. So if somebody wants to put a server on the cloud, they can't have their own private auditors come in and audit Microsoft. Anybody see an issue with that? You'd have auditors running through the data center all day, every day, right? It's just not physically possible. It would not be a secure environment if that were the case. So what we have to do is we have to trust that we have these certifications and more coming, right? I mean, there's thousands of certifications. These are some of the biggest ones. We have to trust that because they have these certifications, we trust the certifying organization, and therefore we know that in order to maintain that certification, they have to do X, Y, and Z. We know that we can trust them on these different components. Now, and there's more as well. So like HIPAA as an example. So HIPAA and BAA, now when it comes to HIPAA, BAA, it's really more about the application than about the infrastructure. And there's some caveats. You can, first of all, there's a contract addendum. So in order to get that certification, in order to maintain that level of trust, you do have to have a contract addendum. And it's only good for virtual machines, cloud service, storage, and networking. So it's not automatically going to cover you for anything and everything that you do in Windows Azure. And of course there's new ones. Microsoft is constantly going to be expanding their level of trust, or their level of certificates, or the level of trust that you can provide in them, that you can get in them by getting these different certificates and going through these different processes. But if you want to find out more, there's a Windows Azure Trust Center. And I've given you the link here, and I would encourage you to go look at it. It talks about privacy, transparent, compliance, and relentless. I would strongly encourage you to read through some of the things that they're doing to make sure that your data is safe, secure, private, not able to be modified, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, when it comes to really protecting your data, who's writing most of the white papers, or a lot of the white papers around this stuff? I mean, it's the guys that are implementing it as part of whenever they introduced Windows Azure, a lot of the stuff, a lot of the policies, and a lot of the white papers that were put out on best practices, they're put out by these guys that put all this infrastructure together. So I would encourage you to take a look at that. Now, Office 365 is one of those applications that is fully compliant with, like the HIPAA BAA. And as you look at different applications, it's also important to look at, from an application security standpoint, what are the requirements that are being met? What level of trust can I have in that application and the security of my data in that application? Okay? There's also an Office 365 Trust Center, and I've given you a link for that, so you can get deeper and deeper into how much you can trust, how secure is your data, and what are the privacy policies, what are the security policies, what are the implications of you putting data into those different environments. All right, so we're going to talk about defense in depth. You guys have heard this term before, defense in depth. And really what I'm going to talk about for the next 15 minutes, wow, time flies. What I'm going to talk about in the next 15 minutes is each one of these layers and really having your defense in depth, your depth level of defense at each and every layer of your stack. So first and foremost, let's talk about physical security. So Microsoft doesn't have your servers, whenever you put something up on Windows Azure, they don't have them sitting in a closet or underneath somebody's desk, right? That's not the way they do things. They're a carrier class data center. They have armed guards at the gates. And if you have a work order to work on something, you're not going to get in there unless you have all the proper paperwork. And whenever you go in there, those armed guards are going to make sure you're only going where your paperwork says you can go, right? 24/7 monitoring, biometric access controls at every single level, right? So access to get into the data center, access to get into to the particular area of the data center, access to get to a particular room, access to get to a particular rack. All of those things require different levels of access. So you have that depth, defense in depth from a physical standpoint. From a network standpoint, automatic configuration. This is key. Right? Because the way the network works is whenever a new network is spun up, it's spun up by the user whenever they basically configure their Azure account or their Azure networking settings. And all of that is done on the fly. The network is created on the fly. So there's no possibility for one network to being crossed with another network or having wires crossed and stuff like that. It's all automated. It's fully 100% automated, so you don't have any possibility of user error. And every time a new system is spun up, it's all scripted. It's all scripted, so you don't. Whenever you spin something up, there's just no possible way for one user. Thank you. There's no possible way for one user to be able to access data on your network or for them to access your network. You have full encryption within your network. That is a private network for you. So you have that literally that VPN separation between networks. And of course you have firewalls and packet filters at the network layer. And oh, by the way, you can't turn that off. You can configure it for your little piece of the network, but Microsoft at the network layer, yeah, you can change the firewall settings on your local computer, but at the network layer, you can't turn off security. So you can't do something so bad that you're opening up your network to other outside vulnerabilities without really realizing it. We do some really incredible things at the host level like Hyper-V isolation. So Hyper-V isolation gives you some really smart people with some really great cool tools can do things like monitor a CPU to see what other systems are doing on that, what other computers might be doing on that host via just the CPU traffic on there. I don't know the technical details of how they do that, but I guess it's possible. So what Microsoft does to combat those really advanced threats are like Hyper-V isolation, where a single core, they're not going to split a core into multiple systems, right? Or into multiple different networks or multiple tenants. So you're going to be dedicating your network, so there's zero possibility that somebody else is going to be able to kind of reverse engineer what's going on in memory or what's going on in the CPU to find out, to capture data from somebody else. And totally secure communications, reduced OS footprint. You don't have all these extra capabilities or vulnerabilities based on a large full server data set. You get only what you need for the services that you're running on that server, and you don't have to worry about all of the other stuff. So trust level, when we talk about the application, every application needs to be looked at very differently. Every application needs to be looked at differently. It's not a matter of I have this set of policies for applications, this set of policies for the server, this set of policies for the network. It's not that simple. Every application should go through its own diligence on understanding what the level of trust should be on that application. In Windows Azure, whenever you deploy an application, you are rebuilding. When a new application is spun up, Windows Azure is rebuilding the entirety of the infrastructure that application runs on. So it's building the server, it's building the network, it's building the application, it's building all the pointers to wherever the data is for that application, and it does it on the fly. Literally. So whenever an application, a server for an application gets spun down, it goes away, right? It completely rebuilds. So if you've got an application that's running on the data center and you've got 3 servers running, a server goes down. Literally, what happens is, for redundancy, Microsoft just spins up another server. Whenever they spin up another server, they're not copying an existing server. They're rebuilding that server from scratch. Granted, it only takes a minute or two because it's all scripted. They're rebuilding that server from scratch based on configuration files. So there's really no possibility that, oh, my server got hacked, therefore anytime any new machine that I get spun up is going to be automatically infected, kind of thing. So there's lots of protection built into the whole process and the way that works. SQL Server. I want to talk just a moment about this. SQL Server is one of those areas that's really, really, really important to protect right. Because if you don't, what's the point of protecting anything, right? SQL Server is built what you fundamentally don't want to do is you don't want to store your keys in the same place that you store your data. So SQL Server has the capability, and really all of Azure has the capability of storing the keys in one place, storing the data in another place, and then we use a trust center, or trust services, in order to marry those two together. And I'm going to show you a little bit about what that looks like. Before I go there, though, I want to re-emphasize and overemphasize, don't put your keys and the data in the same place. Putting your keys and the data in the same place is kind of like putting a padlock on your front door, right? Or putting a whole bunch of padlocks on your front door, and then on the doorknob you have a rubber band with the key hanging off of it, right? That's kind of equivalent, right? Putting your keys and your data in the same place. Somebody that has access to your data can have access to your keys, and now the whole system can be compromised. So the way Microsoft handles that issue is the administrator has the key. The key goes to the trust server. The trust server, like whenever you have data, the data is encrypted like a social security number. The data is encrypted. The trust server actually handles the key, and the encryption is done by the trust server, and then through the key, I forgot I had a build on this, plus the social security number gives you the encrypted data. The encrypted data is then sent to the SQL Azure, and that's where the encrypted data is stored. So the key and the data are stored in 2 very different places. Now, if the user wants to get that data out, they have to go to the trust server to get the public key, or the subscription, to give them the key, and then they have to go get the encrypted data, and then it can be decrypted to give you the social security number. So the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to defense in depth is from the user standpoint and access control. So let me start with, I'm going to actually flip this around a little bit, and I'm going to start with education. How many people here have gone through at least, how many people manage a firewall in the room? How many people manage a firewall? How many people have gone through at least a month worth of training on just managing firewalls? Okay, wow. Okay, a couple of people. There's only a few people that manage firewalls exclusively, and only a couple people that have been through that much training. Well, the thing that I want to point out is, how many people in the room do regular security training on a regular basis? Scheduled security training. Now, I would expect the numbers to be a little bit higher in this kind of a setting because this is a security conference, right? So there was a few hands in the room, and that doesn't surprise me. What would have surprised me is actually in this audience if there was 0. However, in most IT events that I do, usually I would get 0 hands if I asked that kind of question. It's really important to understand that whenever your data is protected by a data center, you don't have people that manage the firewall. First of all, the firewall that they're managing is not an $89 firewall that they've gotten at Best Buy, right? It's a world-class firewall, and you've got world-class people working on those firewalls that have world-class training. And that training is ongoing and constant. They're constantly being patched. They're constantly putting up roadblocks. They're constantly monitoring logs. They're constantly working on. That's what they do for a living. How many people, show of hands, how many people, that's what you do for a living? 100% of the time, nothing but security. Nothing but security. Okay? These are the guys that are total professionals. That's all they do is security. In a data center like a Microsoft data center, they take it one step further. It's not that they're just working security. They're just working this piece of security. Because it goes, remember we talked about separation of responsibilities before. We don't want any one person to have the full understanding of the security scope. Right? That goes back to the separation of responsibilities. So in Microsoft's case, they have awesome equipment, they have awesome people, and they firmly believe in training. So let's talk about federation for a minute. Who knows what federation is? Anybody? Okay. So federation, for those that don't understand, federation gives you the capability of authenticating through other services. So just to put it in simple terms, if you have a Twitter account, you have a Facebook account, you can go to Facebook and sign in with your Twitter account. Right? That's federation. That's what federation is. Where you have, where you're trusting that somebody else has authenticated this user, and you trust that certifying authority. So Live ID is an example of that. So Live ID, you can authenticate with Live ID, and some partners, some Microsoft partners, will trust that authentication. That they know, they trust Microsoft as being the authentication authority, the federated authority, that you are who you say you are. That's what federation is. And from the user standpoint and the user defense in depth, federation is the way that Azure subscribes to security. Now, in that, you can also do Active Directory federation. Active Directory federation is not the same as having Active Directory on Azure. Okay, even though it has a name like Active Directory for Azure or Azure Active Directory. To get Active Directory in Azure, you have to put a domain controller there. But to do federation through Active Directory, you can do that through Azure services. So those are all key things when it comes to defense in depth. So when we look at all the different layers and all the different things that go into securing your infrastructure in the cloud, it begs the question, is the cloud really secure? Well, it is. If you trust all if you trust all the different certifying authorities that have vetted that particular cloud service provider. It is if you trust the people that you have setting up the infrastructure, that is, not setting up administrator with a password for a password, right? So if you trust the people that are setting that up to do due diligence and do smart things and follow best practices, then it is. If you trust private and public key authentication between on-prem and in cloud, if you trust that secure connection or that tunnel, that encrypted tunnel, if you trust that encrypted tunnel, then it is secure. So really it comes down to trust. What do you trust? Right? Who do you trust? What are their policies? What are their procedures? Who would trust all of their data to Gmail, to Google, right? Who trusts their information to Microsoft? Still no hands. Okay, you trust your mom, okay. It's interesting that you say that because I know everybody in here, does anybody not have a single Windows server? Nobody, not a single Windows server in your organization? 1, 2, okay. So I guess my whole talk on trust didn't sit in. I got to figure out how to articulate this better. Because I believe that you do have some level of trust for people. Right? For some level of trust for companies, because if you didn't, you wouldn't trust them in your data center, right? So I've got like 2 minutes left for questions. So yeah, go ahead.
I'm just wondering if Amazon EC2 is secure and how the security model for Azure and EC2 differ.
Wow, do you have another hour? So the question was, what is the difference between the security models between Amazon and Microsoft? And that could be extended to be Amazon, Microsoft, Google, Salesforce, or any other provider, right? You really got to, and that was kind of the whole point of what they're doing to increase your trust in them. That is a long discussion, and I'm not even sure that you can have that discussion in an hour because there are so many differences between privacy, between policies, between security. Now, this is a security discussion, because there's other things too. There's performance, there's availability, there's all these other things you have to consider when you're going into the cloud. But for the security conference, we're talking about security, right? So there's a lot of things that you have to look at. Security is one of them, and it's really beyond the scope to be able to answer that in a 30-second question. Sorry. Yeah.
Does the Trust Center support having the key encryption key in an HSM or an off-prem facility? So say I'm BigCo and I have some HSMs in the SQL Server Enterprise Azure version. Can the key encryption key actually be hosted in HSM so it unwraps the keys that are field specific? I'm
not 100% positive, but I think the answer to that is yes. If you send me an email, I will find the full answer and how to make that work. And what I do whenever I get a question that I don't know the answer to, or I can't answer on stage, is I will post the answer, post the question and the answer. The question was, is there a possibility of storing the keys outside of Windows Azure and going to a third party to do that authentication? I believe the answer to be yes. Was that the question?
Close.
Yeah, close enough. I'll find out, send me the question in detail, I'll find the answer and I'll post it to my blog so that everybody has the benefit of the answer. Other questions? Got like 1 minute. Wow. Okay, thank you all very much. I just want to remind you about the download of the Windows Azure. I would encourage you to go ahead and set up a couple of servers. If you're going to set up a couple of servers, might as well do it in the next couple of days so that you can take advantage of getting your name entered into the drawing for the Xbox. I'll be around for a little bit longer if you have any other questions or want to do some more private questions. Thank you all.
Thank you.